In the midst of a global pandemic, doctors and nurses are running out of personal protective gear. Is this a remote corner of a war-stricken developing country? No, it's the United States, the richest country in the world. And even as the virus spreads exponentially throughout the population, this government wants to open the economy rather than adopt the wise measures virtually the entire world has adopted. Trump and his allies won't let coronavirus or human life get in their way. These pro-life capitalists would rather see millions perish than have to offer concessions to the population.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
This isn't just capitalism. This is the ISIS of capitalism, led by the commander of the faithful, Sheikh Trump. In the dystopian states of America, governors are forced to compete against each other to get desperately needed N95 masks to their hospitals. This is what happens when everything is a commodity.
We're out on the open market competing for these items. We're competing against each other. We're competing against other countries. It's a wild west, I would say, out there. And indeed, we're overpaying, I would say, for PPE because of that competition.
We should be nationalizing the medical supply chain. Instead, we see the invisible hand of the free market going into overdrive. The federal government had 3 months to prepare for this, but they didn't take the threat seriously. And even now, they're moving at a snail's pace to prepare our hospitals for the coming surge of sick patients. Frontline healthcare workers have reported a dire shortage of masks, surgical gowns, and eye gear to protect them from the virus. Nurses in Boston are being forced to use racquetball goggles because they don't have proper medical goggles. My own doctor relatives have been going from one home goods store to the next in search of protective equipment. In New York alone, they need 3 million N95 masks, 50 million surgical masks, and 15,000 ventilators. At the same time, hospitals across the country are at risk of closure unless they get emergency aid. This wasn't inevitable in the most prosperous country on earth, but it was inevitable in a system which prioritizes Wall Street over human life and politics over people. America needs humanitarian intervention. If doctors and nurses don't have protective gear, they either won't treat patients or those that do will contract the virus and possibly die. There won't be anyone left to treat the sick. But Trump hesitated to activate the Defense Production Act, which forces private industry to produce what's needed. Why?
We're a country not based on nationalizing our business. Call a person over in Venezuela, ask them how did nationalization of their businesses work out? Not too well.
Actually, it was going fine in Venezuela until the U.S. sanctioned the hell out of the country. Also, this is a public health emergency. Even Andrew Cuomo, a staunch neoliberal, is demanding we nationalize.
The federal government should nationalize medical supply acquisition. We are competing against other states. In some ways, we're savaging other states. Price gouging is a tremendous problem. There are masks that we were paying 85 cents for. We're now paying $7. Why? Because I'm competing against every other state and in some cases against other countries around the world.
The medical supply shortage is impacting the globe, with countries like Lebanon also running dangerously short. But unlike Lebanon, the U.S. isn't bankrupt. It should be able to access or produce this equipment. Trump's whole strategy depends on asking corporations to pretty please do the right thing. Corporations whose primary concern is their bottom line, not public health. We're so screwed. Consider this. China shut down Wuhan and restricted movement in much of the country on January 23rd, when they had just 500 cases and 17 deaths. That way the virus stayed isolated to mostly the one province, and the rest of China was able to save Wuhan, sending tens of thousands of doctors to help. Compare that to the US, which has tens of thousands of cases, hundreds of deaths, and still hasn't shut shit down, while trying to pass a several $trillion-dollar bailout for corporations that screws workers.
We're not going to let the cure be worse than the problem. America will again and soon be open for business.
We need to cancel capitalism now. Suspend capitalism and the stock market. Halt evictions. Send money to every American and put the country's industries to work making protective equipment and ventilators. Allowing corporations and capitalism to take the lead on this is a catastrophe in the making. To understand just how craven our leaders are, check out the Lieutenant Governor of Texas.
As a senior citizen, Are you willing to take a chance on your survival in exchange for keeping the America that all America loves for your children and grandchildren? And if that's the exchange, I'm all in.
He wants to sacrifice our grandparents for the good of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And he seems to think this virus only targets grandparents. Tell that to the thousands of young people around the world who are also lying in hospital beds, fucking drowning. It didn't have to be this way. If they had done something sooner, they wouldn't have to shut everything down to stop the spread. But they failed at testing and isolating, and now here we are, with New York's infection rate as high as Italy's. This comes down to priorities. A CDC budget of $11 billion versus a military budget of $738 billion. What's the point of all those aircraft carriers, ballistic missiles, rifles and bullets and bases? Is national security about securing us, the people? At its most basic and fundamental meaning, national security should be about keeping a population alive and healthy. The government mobilized all its resources to launch its never-ending wars after 9/11. They spare no expense to overthrow regimes around the world and arm Islamists and fascists. Maybe that's because our national security establishment doesn't exist to protect our security. When members of the Senate Intelligence Committee engage in insider trading to profit off of coronavirus, it's a sign that there's no such thing as national security. There's only personal and class enrichment.